My parents always believed in investing wisely. At least that's what they said. When my older sister received her college acceptance letter, my mother cried tears of joy. My father opened a bottle of sparkling cider he'd been saving for something special. They framed her acceptance letter before the week was over. Within days, they had paid her tuition deposit, leased her an apartment near campus, and even helped her pick out a reliable car. They called it an investment in her future. A year later, when my own acceptance letter arrived from a respected state university, I waited for the same excitement. It never came. My father read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "That's nice," he said. Nice. I had earned a partial academic scholarship. My grades were strong. My professors had written glowing recommendations. I stood there holding the rest of the paperwork, expecting questions about orientation, housing, meal plans. Instead, my mother handed me a brochure for the local community college. "It's more affordable," she explained gently. "We've already committed a lot financially." Committed. That word stayed with me. They had committed to her dreams. Mine, apparently, required reconsideration. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my head. It wasn't the money that hurt the most. It was the message beneath it. She was an investment. I was an expense. And in that quiet darkness, I made a decision. If no one was going to invest in me, I would. Growing up, the differences were subtle at first. My sister was the one teachers described as brilliant and charismatic. She spoke confidently, answered questions without hesitation, and seemed completely at ease in every room she entered. At school events, my parents stood a little taller when her name was mentioned. I was quieter. Not shy, just observant. I preferred books to crowds, planning to spontaneity, listening to speaking. My report cards were consistently strong, but they were met with polite nods rather than celebration. When my sister won a regional debate competition, my parents hosted a dinner party. When I placed first in mathematics, my father said, "That's useful." Useful. That word followed me for years. By the time college applications arrived, the pattern was already clear. My sister applied to several expensive private universities out of state. When she was accepted to her top choice, my parents didn't even discuss alternatives. They toured the campus with her, took photos by the entrance sign, and spoke proudly about her future as if it were already secured. She belongs somewhere prestigious, my mother told relatives. When my acceptance letter arrived from a respected state university, with a scholarship covering nearly half the tuition, I felt hopeful, responsible, practical. But the reaction at home was different. "It's not as well known," my father said carefully. "It doesn't carry the same weight," my mother added. I reminded them about the scholarship. My father sighed. "Even with that, it's still a significant cost. We have to think long-term." Long-term. Apparently, long-term meant funding my sister's apartment, meal plan, and spring break trips. For me, it meant student loans. I tried not to compare. I told myself families have limited resources, that choices aren't personal. But it's hard not to notice when one child is encouraged to dream boldly, while the other is encouraged to minimize. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. "She's steady," my mother said about me. "She'll be fine anywhere." And that was it. I wasn't the risk. I wasn't the star. I was the safe bet. In their minds, my sister needed investment to succeed. I would succeed regardless. It sounded like confidence, but it felt like neglect. That was the moment I understood something important. Favoritism doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sounds practical, logical, responsible. But you feel it all the same. And even if no one says it directly, you know exactly where you stand. I enrolled at the state university 3 months later. Half my tuition was covered by scholarship. The rest would come from federal loans and me. While my sister moved into her fully furnished apartment near her private campus, my parents helped me pack plastic storage bins for a shared dorm room with 2 strangers. There were no celebration dinners. No framed acceptance letter. Just a quiet drop-off and a reminder from my father. Be practical. College began before the sun most days. I scheduled my classes back-to-back so I could work afternoons at the campus library. Evenings, I worked at a small family restaurant off campus. Weekends were double shifts. My alarm rang at 6 a.m. I was usually in bed after midnight. Some days I felt less like a student and more like a machine, moving from lecture hall to library desk to restaurant kitchen without pause. I learned how to stretch $20 across a week of groceries. I learned that exhaustion has levels. And I learned that pride can be both fuel and weight. Meanwhile, my sister's social media was filled with football games, sorority formals, beach vacations. My parents visited her twice that first semester. They sent care packages. They paid for her textbooks without question. When I called home, conversations were brief. "How are classes?" my mother would ask. "Good," I'd say. "Working hard?" "Yes." "Good. We always knew you were responsible." Responsible. It sounded like praise. But it meant, you'll handle it. There were nights I studied in my car between shifts because I didn't want to waste gas driving back to campus. I'd sit under a parking lot light, textbook open, reviewing notes while customers walked past. Sometimes I wondered what it would feel like to focus only on school. To not calculate hours and dollars. To not choose between sleep and study. But every time doubt crept in, something stronger answered it. If they believed I could handle it alone, I would prove them right. By sophomore year, my grades were near the top of my department. A professor stopped me after class one afternoon. "You ask thoughtful questions," he said. "Have you considered applying for the honors research program?" No one had ever suggested something like that to me before. At home, I was the steady one. Here, I was seen. I applied. I was accepted. The research program came with no extra pay, no extra time, but it came with mentorship, guidance, opportunity. I added it to my schedule anyway. There were weeks I felt stretched thin enough to tear. I missed social events. I skipped birthday trips. I turned down invitations because I had shifts to cover. But slowly, something changed inside me. The struggle stopped feeling like punishment. It started feeling like construction. Every challenge built discipline. Every setback sharpened focus. Every quiet success strengthened confidence. I wasn't just surviving college. I was building resilience. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't competing with my sister. I was competing with a version of myself who once believed she needed someone else's approval to succeed. By junior year, I no longer checked her social media. I checked my grades. And they told a different story. One that didn't require comparison. One that didn't need applause. Just progress. And that was enough. By the start of senior year, something had shifted. I wasn't just keeping up anymore. I was leading. My name started appearing at the top of departmental rankings. Professors recommended me for academic panels. I was asked to tutor first-year students who reminded me of myself, determined, uncertain, carrying more responsibility than they showed. But I didn't tell my parents. Not out of resentment. Just distance. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped expecting their reaction to define my worth. I updated them when they asked, but I no longer offered details hoping for excitement. Meanwhile, things at home weren't as smooth as they once seemed. My sister had changed her major again. What began as political science became marketing, then communications. She called home often overwhelmed. She struggled academically, socially, emotionally. My parents stepped in every time. Extra tuition. Extended rent support. Reassurance that she just needed more time. And maybe she did. But I noticed something quietly ironic. The one they thought needed investment to succeed was struggling with all the support in the world. The one they thought would be fine anywhere was thriving with almost none. Midway through my final semester, I received an email from the dean's office. Subject line, academic recognition notice. I almost ignored it, assuming it was generic. It wasn't. I had been ranked first in my graduating class. Valedictorian. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. No dramatic tears. No phone call home. Just stillness. I reread the message carefully. It confirmed not only the ranking, but an invitation to deliver the commencement speech. For years earlier, I had stood in my bedroom feeling overlooked. Now, I was being asked to stand in front of thousands. I thought about telling my parents immediately. But I didn't. Not yet. I wanted the moment to belong to me first. Over the next few weeks, I worked on my speech between shifts and research deadlines. I didn't write about struggle directly. I didn't mention favoritism. I didn't criticize. Instead, I wrote about quiet perseverance. About the power of self-belief when external belief is absent. About resilience built in unseen hours. As graduation approached, invitations were mailed. My parents confirmed they were coming. I wondered if they expected anything unusual. Probably not. After all, my sister was graduating too. In their minds, the day would be about both daughters walking across the stage. Equal. Balanced. Predictable. But life rarely unfolds according to expectations. On the final day of classes, I met with the dean briefly to confirm ceremony details. As I left his office, he said something that stayed with me. "You earn this not just through grades," he said, "but through character." Character. That word meant more than any ranking. Because character is forged under pressure. And pressure had shaped me for 4 years. I walked across campus that afternoon differently. Not taller. Not louder. Just certain. For once, I didn't feel like the practical choice. Or the safe bet. Or the background presence. I felt first. And no one could take that away, not past decisions, not comparisons, not old narratives. Graduation day was coming. And this time, my name would be called before anyone else's. Graduation morning arrived quietly. No dramatic sunrise. No sudden clarity. Just a calm, steady awareness that something important was about to close, and something even more important was about to begin. I put on my cap and gown slowly, smoothing the fabric as if it were fragile. For years of early mornings, double shifts, research deadlines, and silent resilience were stitched into those folds. The auditorium was already buzzing when I arrived. Families filled the seats. Cameras flashed. Laughter echoed across the rows. I spotted my parents near the center section. My sister sat between them, excited, animated, waving when she saw me. My mother smiled warmly. My father gave a small nod. They looked proud. But it was a general pride, the kind reserved for the idea of graduation. The ceremony began with the usual speeches, tradition, achievement, future promise. My sister's name was called first among our row. My parents stood to clap. My mother wiped her eyes. I clapped too. Genuinely. Then the dean returned to the podium for special recognitions. "And now," he said, adjusting his glasses, "we honor a student whose academic excellence and resilience have set a remarkable example for this graduating class." The room quieted. My heart didn't pound. It felt steady, grounded. This year's valedictorian. There was a pause that felt longer than it was. Is someone who balanced work, research, and academic distinction with exceptional discipline. And then, he said my name. For a second, the world narrowed to a single point. Then applause erupted. Loud, sustained. I stood slowly. Not in shock. Not in disbelief. But in recognition. As I walked toward the stage, I glanced toward my parents. My mother's mouth was slightly open. My father had frozen mid-clap. They hadn't known. I climbed the steps, shook the dean's hand, and looked out at the audience from the podium. Thousands of faces. Years of effort. All converging in one quiet, undeniable moment. When I began my speech, my voice didn't tremble. I spoke about perseverance. About unseen effort. About becoming strong in spaces where you are underestimated. I didn't mention favoritism. I didn't need to. Some lessons are most powerful when unspoken. As I finished, the applause returned, stronger than before. And when I walked back to my seat, I realized something profound. For the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in anyone's shadow. I wasn't the practical choice. I wasn't the safe option. I was the example. And this time, everyone saw it. After the ceremony, the auditorium dissolved into noise, laughter, hugs, the rustle of gowns, families gathering for photos. My sister reached me first. "I had no idea," she said, half laughing, half stunned. "Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled gently. It didn't feel necessary. There was no bitterness in my voice, just truth. A few moments later, my mother stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me tighter than she had in years. "We didn't realize." She whispered against my shoulder. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. My father stood in front of me, hands in his pockets, searching for words. For a man who always spoke with certainty, he looked unsure. "You did all this? Working that much?" he finally asked. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "You proved us wrong." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the beginning of understanding. We took pictures first with my sister, then all together. In every photo, something had subtly shifted. Not the smiles, Not the setting. The balance. On the drive home, the conversation felt different. My parents asked questions they had never asked before, about my research, about graduate school, about my plans. They listened. That was new. Later that evening, as the house grew quiet, my father knocked softly on my bedroom door. "I thought you'd be fine anywhere," he said carefully. "I didn't realize how much you were carrying alone." I met his eyes. "I was fine," I replied, "but not because it was easy." He nodded. That night, lying in my childhood room one last time, I felt something unexpected. Not victory. Not revenge. Closure. They hadn't invested in me the way they invested in my sister. But their doubt had built something in me that support alone never could have. Self-trust. And that was worth more than tuition. Sometimes the people closest to us misjudge our strength. Sometimes they place their bets elsewhere. But success is not determined by who supports you loudly. It's shaped by who you become quietly. When no one is applauding. When no one is investing. When no one is watching. That's where character is built. I didn't succeed to prove my parents wrong. I succeeded because I chose not to let their doubt define me. And in the end, the greatest achievement wasn't the title of valedictorian. It was learning to believe in myself first.